as we look back on the spectacularly successful career of John Kennedy, now ended so prematurely and tragically, and also on the career of Lyndon Johnson, we can't help being struck by the narrow margin by which at two critical moments in their careers they succeeded. In the case of John Kennedy, of course, everybody remembers that he won the presidency by a margin of only 113,000 in the popular vote, which was just a very small fraction of a percentage point. In the case of Lyndon Johnson, who had already run once for the Senate and lost, he ran again in 1948. Now, in this case, he faced a number of formidable opponents. One of them, Governor Coke Stevenson, who was a well-known, popular politician, and Governor Stevenson had gone through 30 years without a defeat. Stevenson led in the Democratic primary in Texas. This is Governor Coke Stevenson in 1948, but failed of a clear majority, so a runoff was necessary. Johnson, who ran second in the first primary, won over Governor Coke Stevenson in the runoff primary by a margin of 87 votes out of 1 million votes cast. The result actually was in doubt for several days, and there were court fights on the issue. But in the end, Lyndon Johnson came out victorious. If he had not won those 87 votes, if the result had gone the other way, obviously he would not be where he is right now. And now, a further reaction on politics. We're going to hear from Representative Bob Wilson, the Republican Congressional Campaign Chairman.
There can be no question that politics on both Republican and Democrat side will be in limbo until next year. There will be no more politicking until certainly the primary time next year.
That was Representative Wilson, chairman of the Republican Congressional Campaign Committee. A note on Johnson's personal life. He met his future wife at a hearing of the Texas Railroad Commission in Austin, Texas, on September 12, 1934. She was Claudia Taylor, but everyone called her Lady Bird, and everybody still calls her Lady Bird. The nickname stuck, and the Congressional Directory listed her maiden name not as Claudia, but as Lady Bird Taylor. She and the future president were married late in 1934. Their first child was named Linda Bird Johnson, and their second, Lucy Baines Johnson. The new president once said, "We all have the same initials, so we can all use the same baggage for traveling." Mrs. Johnson comes from a wealthy family, and the family owned a radio and television station in Austin, Texas. Mr. Johnson early gained a reputation in Washington for hard work. The slogan that soon became part of the future president's tradition was, "He gets the job done." His wife once remarked that Lyndon acts as if there was never going to be a tomorrow. Tomorrow has finally come. Alan?
Dallas, I think that the reaction that we have been getting from the other side of the Iron Curtain is particularly interesting. And we've just received some new notes on how the people in Russia have expressed sorrow at this tragedy this afternoon. The Reuters dispatch that is just filed in says that Russians on snow-swept Red Square in the heart of Moscow openly expressed deep regret at the assassination of President Kennedy. One of the guards at Lenin's red and black granite mausoleum, a Red Army captain, said, "We very much regret this. As we say, each country has its villains." And then he went on to say that recently, in spite of ideological differences, there had been strivings on both sides to improve relations. And Kennedy was of the view that we should have closer links. It is very sad that assassins fell upon him. The reaction of a Red Army captain on guard duty at Lenin's mausoleum in Moscow. An engineer in a broad-brimmed hat and heavy overcoat said, "The whole Soviet people are sorry. We consider that Kennedy was able to regulate things in dangerous moments. We regarded him as a very positive and highly esteemed his activities." And one of a group of young male students standing near St. Basil's Cathedral in Moscow at the end of the Kremlin Square summed it up when he said, "It is bad for the American people and for our people." What might have happened, he asked, if there had been another president at the time of Cuba? Wcco-Radio played funeral music after announcing Mr. Kennedy's death.
Alan, Cardinal Cushing, Richard Cardinal Cushing, the Archbishop of Boston, has now recorded a statement of sympathy and regret at the death of the president, and we're going to switch now for that to Vin Maloney of station WEEI in Boston.
Richard Cardinal Cushing, Roman Catholic Archbishop of Boston, will offer a low mass of requiem for President John F. Kennedy at the National Shrine of the Immaculate Conception in Washington next Monday at 1 o'clock. The Cardinal said tonight there will be no eulogy. The Cardinal told me he had been in communication with the White House, but did not know at this time whether the President would be laid to rest in Washington or in his native Brookline, Massachusetts, where his prematurely born son, Patrick Bouvier Kennedy, was buried last September. Cardinal Cushing was a lifelong friend of the Kennedy family. He married the then Senator Kennedy and Jacqueline Bouvier at Hammersmith Farms in Newport, Rhode Island in 1961. He christened the Kennedy children and delivered the invocation at the President's inaugural. The Cardinal was gaunt and deeply moved. Heartbroken, he described it, as he issued this statement tonight on the President's death.
Every inhabited section of this earth is in sorrow over the terrible tragedy that deprived our country of one of its greatest presidents and the world of one of its most courageous leaders. My heart is broken with grief over his martyrdom for the cause of a free world. My prayers go forth in sympathy to his dear wife, his beloved father and mother, and all the members of his family. Their sorrow is beyond words to describe. I shall visit them on the morrow at Hyannisport. John F. Kennedy, known to me for a lifetime, loved by me as a devoted friend, has laid down his life for us all. Greater love than this no man hath. Since the day he assumed the office of the presidency of the United States, he exemplified in his life and especially in his death the title of his famous book, Profiles in Courage. In his inaugural address, he stated he would not shrink from his responsibilities. He was faithful to that pledge unto death. Truly, he was an inspiring profile in courage. It is not possible for me to comment any further. Deep is my sorrow in the loss of a great friend, and heavy my compassion for all his loved ones who have silently carried, unknown to multitudes, some of the heaviest crosses of life. I pray that the martyrs of all times may lead him into paradise, and the good Lord may help us to appreciate and profit by the lessons of dedication, courage, and loyalty that John F. Kennedy bequeathed to us. I pray especially that the youth, not only of our own country, but of the entire world, will learn a lesson from his courageous plans, policies, and work for the freedom and the equality which his youthful vigor had labored so hard and so earnestly for all nations. May he rest in peace.
This is Vin Maloney in Boston, returning you to CBS News, New York.
It has been announced in Washington that a gun will thunder each half hour from dawn to dark tomorrow at each Army and Marine Corps base to render honor to the late President Kennedy, the Commander-in-Chief.
We will return to the CBS radio network after these special announcements from the Wcco-Radio Department of News and Public Affairs. It's 6 minutes before 6, RCCO temperature 29 degrees. These are cancellations for tonight and some indication of things that will continue and go on. The Minnesota-Wisconsin football game scheduled for tomorrow has been called off. All Dad's Day activities at the university have been canceled. The Vikings-Detroit Lions game scheduled for Sunday will be played. Other postponements. The Hinckley, Minnesota High School play for tonight postponed. The House of Charity card party to be held at the Unity House in Minneapolis this evening has been canceled. The performance of the all-school play at the Centennial High School in Circle Pines, Minnesota for this evening, canceled. The Elk River Monticello basketball game scheduled for tonight, canceled. The game was to have been held at Elk River. The production of Romeo and Juliet at the Robbinsdale High School will go on tonight at 8 o'clock as scheduled. Other cancellations, the card party sponsored by the Lauderdale Civic Club at the Lauderdale Civic Hall, scheduled for 8 tomorrow night, has been canceled. Wilmer High School versus Bloomington, a game to be played at Wilmer tonight, has been canceled. The Interfraternity Council at the university has announced that all social events planned for tomorrow night in the fraternity and sorority system at the university have been canceled. A parent-teacher meeting at Bloomington Lutheran School, canceled tonight. Mille Lacs County 4-H Award program scheduled for tomorrow night at Mille Lacs, Minnesota High School, canceled. A dance schedule at New Ulm High School tonight, canceled. Dance of the 200 Dance Club scheduled for tomorrow night at the Thunderbird Motel, canceled. Cub Scout Pack 367 of Groveland School in Minnetonka Village, canceled for tonight. Tomorrow night's dance of the University of Minnesota Law School, canceled. The basketball game, Shakopee High School versus St. Anthony, canceled tonight. The teenage dance at Eden Valley Community Building, sponsored by the Explorer Scout, canceled for tonight. The Rockford School drama play scheduled for tonight has been canceled. The Elmwood-Boyceville basketball game scheduled for Elmwood tonight, canceled. Other cancellations, the PTA meeting of the Pilgrim Lutheran School tonight. The Safari Teenage Club will be closed tonight at Mendota. Tonight's Olympic hockey game at Rochester has been called off. However, the Omaha at St. Paul hockey game tonight will be played as scheduled. Now, other cancellations, the Stillwater High School wrestling match for tonight, the basketball game for tomorrow night, both postponed. The St. Helena's Church Men's Club bingo game canceled this evening. The athletic jamboree at Renville, Minnesota, scheduled tonight has been canceled. The South Grove Mrs. J.C.'s information program on the mentally retarded postponed until December 2nd. St. Paul Wilson High School's play Harvey, scheduled for tonight, has been postponed. The St. Paul Jewish National Fund 60th anniversary dinner, scheduled for Sunday night, has been postponed. The faculty basketball game at Osseo High School called off. The Fun Fest at Pillsbury School in northeast Minneapolis canceled. The dance at Prior Lake High School canceled. The school play at Columbia Heights Senior High, both tonight and tomorrow night, canceled. The Community Youth Center program at Elam Baptist Church in northeast Minneapolis canceled tonight. Tomorrow night's Navy League dinner for fathers and sons, scheduled for Kaufman Union on the university campus, has been canceled. The KCYO dance to be held at 6th and Hennepin tonight has been canceled. The Shakopee Knights of Columbus annual benefit dance scheduled tonight for Carver Pavilion in Carver has been postponed. The B'nai B'rith Youth Organization of Minneapolis' annual Sweethearts dance at the Cap Tower, scheduled tomorrow night, has been postponed. The University of Minnesota theater performances tonight and Saturday night have been canceled. The dance tonight at the Isaac Walton League in North Minneapolis canceled. The Upper Midwest Indian Center powwow scheduled for tomorrow night at Unity House in North Minneapolis canceled. The St. Paul Monroe High School dance scheduled tonight has been canceled. A dance and turkey raffle sponsored by the Isaac Walton League postponed until Tuesday. The game between New Richmond High School and Durand High School has been canceled. The St. Paul Jewish National Fund 60th anniversary dinner scheduled to be held Sunday at 6:30 at the Temple of Aaron in St. Paul has been canceled. Now, quickly, a look at the weather. Some snow flurries. The only heavy snowfall predicted is in Wisconsin, where there may be up to 4 inches near Lake Superior tonight. The Twin Cities forecast diminishing cloudiness and much colder tonight. Tomorrow, fair and colder, occasional cloudiness and a little colder tomorrow night. The low tonight, 12 above. The high tomorrow, 20. The low tomorrow night, 5 above. 29 right now, a minute and a half before 6. Studios, Minneapolis, St. Paul at 830 WCCO. WCCO continues its reports of the events following the assassination of President Kennedy. With more information, we hear Winston Burnett in Rome from the CBS Radio Network.
Close to President Kennedy, partly because he was recently here, and they were expecting to see him again next year, along with Mrs. Kennedy, partly because they had great sympathy for his youth and for his courage. They admired him very much, and also I think they felt a special tie to him because this is a Catholic country. And so there was shock in the streets. You could overhear the comments of people as they went into the coffee bars and cafes and came out of shops and so on. They all commented on it. And I should say that their reaction with regard to the motives for the crime were all the same. Everyone in the streets immediately assumed that this was the act of, as they said, those racists.
Well, of course, that may not be a logical assumption. There's no indication yet of what the motive was.
As
we were reporting a few moments ago, the assassin has not yet been caught.
I understand that.
Well, here in the United States, Winston, the reaction has been one of absolute stupefaction. I don't believe that anybody actually can find the words to express his horror at it. It's one of those things that's, well, as we were all saying, it just seems incredible, impossible.
Also,
and I suppose that's the way you feel over there.
It's exactly the same way. I think the human reaction everywhere has been the same, and as the night has worn on here, this feeling of greater anxiety, I think, as the first shock not has worn off, but as the first shock wave, so to speak, has passed, then a certain anxiety has come to the surface. And I think political men responsible for political affairs in Europe and Italy and in other countries are expressing themselves, expressing their anxiety in very much the same way as the ordinary man in the street is.
Yes.
They ask the same questions of what will happen now? Where will the world go now? What will happen to East-West relations?
Winston, Dan Shore was saying from Bonn a few minutes ago that Chancellor Earhart is planning to come to Washington for the president's funeral. Is there any indication there that President Senyi might do the same thing?
No, there has been no indication yet of that. None whatever. President Senyi has sent a message to Washington. He has sent a message to Mrs. Kennedy. He has made a statement of his own. He's also announced that either tomorrow or the day after, perhaps, a solemn funeral mass will be held at the Quirinal Palace, which is his residence, being the White House of Italy. But there's been no indication as to whom Italy would send to Washington to attend the state funeral.
I see. Winston, thank you very much for that report. We'll probably be back to you again later on. That was Winston Burnett in Rome. Alan?
Dallas, we're going to pause in a moment for station identification across the country, but first we have a message for our listeners and our affiliated stations. The CBS Radio Network will supply continuous programming throughout this evening and until 12 midnight Eastern Standard Time. That is 11 o'clock Central, 10 o'clock Mountain, and 9 o'clock Pacific Standard Time. This programming will consist entirely of news broadcasts and appropriate music. We will provide similar network programming tomorrow and Sunday. At the close of tonight's programming, we will notify our affiliated stations in greater detail of our plans for the weekend. We are now going to pause for 5 seconds for stations to identify themselves. This is the CBS Radio Network.
Studios, Minneapolis, St. Paul at 830 WCCO, 29 degrees.
Back at CBS News headquarters in New York, with our coverage of today's tragedy and the resulting events, Britain's Queen Elizabeth has sent a message of sympathy to Mrs. Jacqueline Kennedy, saying, "I am so deeply distressed to learn of the tragic death of President Kennedy. My husband joins me in sending our heartfelt and sincere sympathy to you and to your family." The Queen also sent a message to President Lyndon Johnson, saying, "On behalf of my peoples, I send my sincere sympathy to the government and to the Congress and to the people of the United States of America." Britain's Prime Minister, Sir Alec Douglas Hume, sent a message to President Johnson saying, "On behalf of the British government, I extend to you and to the government of the United States of America our deepest sympathy in the terrible loss that you have sustained by the assassination of President Kennedy. He was greatly admired and loved by us all. I extend to you our assurance of friendship and support in the heavy burdens which have devolved upon you." The message from Britain's Prime Minister, Sir Alec Douglas Hume. Hundreds of people have flocked to the American Embassy in Grosvenor Square in London to pay tribute to the late president. Visitors were allowed into the main foyer, where many signed their names and addresses, adding such tributes as "with deepest sympathy" on paper provided on 2 desks. The crowd filed silently into the embassy building and stood patiently in line, just waiting for their turn to sign. Earlier, hundreds of telephone calls from Americans and others jammed the embassy switchboard following news of the assassination. The English Soccer League tonight asked all league clubs to observe 1 minute silence before tomorrow's league games as a mark of respect for President Kennedy. All players in the English Soccer League will wear black armbands and flags will be flown at half-mast. Yugoslavia's President Tito has telephoned the American Charge d'Affaires in Belgrade to express deep sympathy at the president's assassination. A head and shoulders portrait of the president appeared on Yugoslav TV screens as Yugoslavia's top commentator announced the death in an emotional voice. The Yugoslav government ordered national flags to be flown at half-mast on public buildings tomorrow and canceled all sports meetings and entertainments, including those of radio and television, as a mark of sympathy. And Belgrade Radio switched from scheduled light music programs to solemn music, interrupted only by special news bulletins about the assassination. In Latin America, Venezuela's President Romulo Betancourt broke down, his eyes brimming with tears, as he spoke to reporters in Caracas about the president's assassination. Betancourt said he was a great friend and turned his head away at that point. Later, he went on to say, "Democrats of the world are in mourning." Here in New York, there is more reaction from the people on the street. Let's hear the story from news correspondent Bernard Eisman at Times Square.
The Great White Way dimmed its lights in honor of President Kennedy today. As evening approached, the giant advertising spectaculars at Light and Broadway flickered out. The movie houses closed their box offices and turned the bulbs out on their giant marquees, advertising classic and lurid pictures, but all in a welter of color that normally make this the brightest street in the world. The legitimate theaters and the side streets off Broadway, they too closed their box offices and doused the lights on their marquees. For the crowds along Broadway, usually jam-packed, elbow to elbow and knee to knee on Friday and Saturday nights, this was a night of being stunned. There are very few people along the street, and those there are carry newspapers, talk silently one to the other, or stop and listen to radios or watch television sets in those few stores that are still open. At the hot dog stands, they too have dimmed their lights, the little radios go, and people cluster about drinking a soft drink and listening to the details of this day of tragedy. Traffic along the street is very light. Few cars are seen moving. The rush and honking of cabs is gone. In fact, in more than an hour on the street, a strange silence prevailed. Not the honk of a horn was heard, not the curse of a cab driver, not the squeal of a tire. Just quiet. And that's Broadway tonight. This is Bernard Eisman in Times Square.
President Lyndon Johnson is in the White House, where he met first with Defense Secretary McNamara and then McGeorge Bundy, who was President Kennedy's special assistant on national security affairs. President Johnson has also scheduled a meeting for about this hour, or perhaps a few minutes from now, with key congressional leaders of both parties, leaders of both the House and the Senate. As the new president arrived back at the Andrews Air Force Base in Maryland just about an hour ago, he made a short, sad statement saying, "This is a sad time for all people. We have suffered a loss that cannot be weighed. For me, it is a deep personal tragedy. I know the world shares the sorrow that Mrs. Kennedy and her family bear, And then the new president added, "I will do my best. That is all I can do. I ask your help and God's." And now the new president is in the White House conferring on the next steps to be taken as he assumes the highest office of the land.
Alan, the statement that the new president made reminds you of the statement that Harry Truman made when he succeeded to the presidency after the unexpected death of Franklin Roosevelt. The new President Truman said, "I feel as if the moon and the stars had fallen on me. I ask your help." He said that to the reporters. I suppose that it's an inevitable feeling at a time like this when the crushing responsibility of the president is thrust on you without warning, especially in circumstances so melodramatic and catastrophic as those today in Texas.
WCCO continues its coverage with these special announcements of memorial services and other church services this evening. This comes to you from the WCCO Radio Department of News and Public Affairs. A memorial service at Zion Lutheran Church in North Minneapolis, 8 o'clock this evening. A memorial service at Our Savior's Lutheran Church in New Ulm, 8 tonight. At 9 o'clock this evening, the Church of the Nativity in Bloomington will have a Requiem High Mass. The Roseville Lutheran Church in St. Paul, a prayer service tonight at 7. A Requiem High Mass at the Nativity of Mary Church in Bloomington, 9 tonight. The Grace Lutheran Church in St. Paul, a prayer service at 7:45. Grace University Church on the university campus, a memorial service at 7:30. Jehovah's Lutheran Church services at Central Lutheran School in St. Paul, 8 p.m. tonight. Memorial service at Grace Lutheran Church in Deep Haven, 7:30 tonight. A special service at the Golden Valley Methodist Church at 8:30 tonight. A Mass at the Nativity Catholic Church in Bloomington at 9 tonight. A joint Protestant memorial service in New Richmond, Wisconsin at the United Protestant Church tonight at 8. St. Mark's Lutheran Church in North St. Paul, a prayer service at 8. St. David's Episcopal Church in Minnetonka Village, a service of Holy Communion at 8. Special memorial services tomorrow morning at Beaver Lake Lutheran Church in St. Paul. A prayer service at 7:30 tonight, St. John's Episcopal Church in South Minneapolis. Memorial services tonight at Mount Calvary Lutheran Church in Richfield at 8 p.m., Simpson Methodist Church in Minneapolis at 7:30, All Saints Lutheran Church in Minnetonka at 8 p.m., at the Prince of Peace Lutheran Church in St. Louis Park at 8 p.m., special services at St. Andrew's Episcopal Church in South St. Paul at 7:30, a prayer service at St. Andrew's Lutheran Church in Matamidi at 7 p.m., at Good Shepherd Lutheran Church in South St. Paul at 6:30. 7:30 this evening, prayer services at all of these Anoka churches: First Congregational, Zion Lutheran, First Methodist, Elim Baptist, Anoka Assembly of God, and Anoka Covenant Church. Special service at Prince of Peace Lutheran Church in Spring Lake Park at 8 p.m. The Methodist Church of Hudson, Wisconsin will be open for prayer and meditation tonight. The Hope Presbyterian Church in Richfield, a memorial service at 7:30. The Mount Carmel Lutheran Church in northeast Minneapolis, a memorial service this evening at 8. 7 o'clock tonight, the Como Park Lutheran Church in St. Paul and St. Timothy's Lutheran Church in St. Paul will hold services. St. Mark's Church in St. Paul will have special memorial services at 8 tonight. St. Nicholas Episcopal Church in Richfield will have Requiem Holy Communion at 8:30 this evening. St. Michael's Ukrainian Orthodox Church in northeast Minneapolis, a special service at 7, a memorial service at 7:30 at the Anoka Congregational Church. St. Peter's AME Church in South Minneapolis, a memorial service at 7:30. St. Peter's Lutheran Church in Edina, a memorial service at 7. At 8 tonight, a prayer service at Hope Lutheran Church in Nokomis Park. 7 tonight, a high Requiem Mass at St. Andrew's Church in Granite Falls, Minnesota. Holy Communion at the Episcopal Church of St. John the Evangelist in St. Paul at 7:30. A special service at Shalom Tabernacle in Minneapolis, 8 p.m. A memorial service at Knox Presbyterian Church in Minneapolis at 7:30. The Chapel Hills Congregational Church and the Colonial Church of Edina will hold a joint service of prayer at 7:30 tonight. A mission at 8 o'clock, then a Requiem High Mass at St. Gregory the Great in St. Paul, a memorial service at Mount Olivet Lutheran Church in Minneapolis at 7, a memorial service at St. Luke Presbyterian at Lake Minnetonka at 8, a high Requiem Mass at St. Victoria Church in Victoria at 8, a high Requiem Mass at the Church of the Resurrection in Minneapolis at 8. Just a few more. A service of prayer at 7 this evening at Mount Olive Lutheran Church in Minneapolis. Services until 8 tonight at Christ Methodist Church in St. Paul. A service at 8 at McAllister Presbyterian in St. Paul. A Mass for the Dead at St. Rose of Lima in St. Paul, 8:30. A memorial prayer service at the University Lutheran Church of Hope at 7. A memorial service and prayers at St. Christopher's Episcopal Church in Roseville at 7. A special service at the Lutheran Church of the Redeemer in St. Paul at 7:30. A memorial service at B'nai Abraham Synagogue in St. Louis Park at 8:15. A Requiem Mass at the Holy Family Church in St. Louis Park at 8. A Requiem Mass at St. Timothy's Church in Northeast Minneapolis at 8. Prayer service at Parker's Lake Methodist Church at 8 tonight. First Presbyterian Church of Stillwater will be open for prayers at 8 tonight. St. Peter's AME Church in Minneapolis will be open all evening for prayers. A Requiem Mass at the Church of St. John the Baptist of New Brighton at 8 p.m. and a memorial service at Temple Israel, 24th and Emerson Avenue South in Minneapolis at 8:15. Our CCO Twin City temperature is 28 degrees, a low tonight of 12 above, the high tomorrow 20, and the low tomorrow night 5 above. The forecast for the Twin Cities area, diminishing cloudiness and much colder tonight. Tomorrow fair and colder, occasional cloudiness and a little colder tomorrow night. Minnesota diminishing cloudiness, much colder tonight, occasional snow in the northeast. However, the Highway Department says the driving conditions in northwestern Minnesota have improved after considerable blading and sanding. There are still icy spots. Motorists who plan to drive in the area of Crookston, Wadena, Bemidji, and Thief River Falls should be on constant alert. Studios, Minneapolis-St. Paul at 8:30. This is WCCO. We continue our reports of the events following the assassination of President Kennedy. With more information from the CBS Radio Network, we join Alan Jackson at CBS headquarters in New York.
And he said he spoke for all Swedes in paying tribute to the great American president.
Alan, halfway around the world, the Far East, which is 12, 13, and in some cases 14 hours ahead of us, is waking up on Saturday morning to the news of the death of the president. And for the story as it looks in Tokyo right now, we're going to hear from CBS News correspondent Peter Kalischer in Tokyo.
A shocked Japan that was to have witnessed a filmed television greeting from President Kennedy, relayed by Telstar from the United States early this morning, learned instead that the president had been assassinated. The live part of the program went on as scheduled, but the film greeting by Kennedy, who by then had been dead for an hour and 20 minutes, was deleted. No reference to his death was made on the program, but the news was bulletined by radio. The Emperor and Empress of Japan, Prime Minister Ikeda, and other high Japanese officials have sent messages of condolence to the White House. Ordinary Japanese were at first incredulous. How could this happen in America, was the question asked this correspondent over and over. Then genuine sorrow was expressed and concern over the future of world affairs. I hope nothing happens to disturb the peace, said a student on the way to school. The third annual U.S.-Japan Economic Conference, which was to have opened Monday, was postponed indefinitely when 5 members of President Kennedy's cabinet, including Secretary of State Gene Rusk, on their way to Tokyo, flew back to Hawaii on news of the president's death. This is Peter Kalischer in Tokyo.
Well, that's the first reaction we've had from the Far East. Undoubtedly, additional reaction will come in from elsewhere as the news spreads. And as we said, it is now Saturday morning in the Far East. It will be interesting to observe the reaction in South Vietnam, among other places. In South Vietnam, in Laos, in Cambodia, and in Thailand, all parts of Southeast Asia which have been threatened with communist aggression and subversion, and which has been so much on the president's mind in the past 3 years, ever since he became president. Alan?
Dallas, there are a couple of side notes to reaction in the Far East to follow up on Peter's report from Tokyo. On Formosa, aides to Chinese nationalist leader Chiang Kai-shek awoke him to advise him of the death of President Kennedy, and they described Chiang Kai-shek as being horrified. The news hit India after midnight Indian time, when most of the nation slept. The shock awaited them when they awoke and are awaking now. But one of them was Prime Minister Nehru, and aides say that they were reluctant to awaken him because, they say, the news would shock him beyond words. Well, of course, it is now morning in New Delhi. Prime Minister Nehru is awake and certainly has received the news. Other expressions of grief are coming in from around the world. In Cairo, President Nasser of the United Arab Republic is reported to be immensely grieved at the assassination. The newspaper Al-Aram in Cairo said Nasser had cabled condolences to Mrs. Kennedy, saying, "With his death, humanity, progress, and peace suffered a loss by no means less great than yours. It is a painful tragedy." The expression of Egypt's President Nasser. Queen Juliana and Prince Bernhard of the Netherlands sent messages of condolences to Mrs. Kennedy. In Algiers, President Ahmed Ben Bella telephoned our ambassador William Porter to express his sorrow. Peru's President Belaúnde Terry was visibly shaken. He telephoned our ambassador in Lima and said, "I consider his death as an irreparable world loss. I am praying for the Kennedys." The Shah of Iran, King Hussein of Jordan, King Baudouin of the Belgians, are three other monarchs who have joined in the world's sorrowing. In Paris, the usually gay nightclubs and cafes have been plunged into gloom. One waiter at the nightclub, upon hearing of the news of the president's death, said, "It is incredible. I don't want to believe it. It is a joke in bad taste." But news of the death came over the radio, and English pubs filled with Friday evening crowds and left most persons with no thirst for beer. As one of them said, everybody just stopped drinking when it was announced. And now we have more reaction from the capital of Russia. Let's hear now again from Moscow and CBS News correspondent Stuart Novins.
The final broadcast on Radio Moscow tonight reported the shock of the people of the United States, and Radio Moscow's correspondents around the world were quoted as reporting the same numb reaction of people in other capitals. The news broadcast talked about the suspected murderer as connected with ultra-right-wing elements. The bulletin said that Mr. Kennedy had in his pocket a speech denouncing ultra-right-wing opponents which he was to have delivered in Dallas. The hard news was followed by a biography of the late president, one that had been given on earlier broadcasts, calling him a great American and a great statesman. Then Radio Moscow reported that Lyndon Johnson had been sworn in, and the biography of the new president was given. President Johnson, is not very well known here. The man on the street has probably never heard of him. That unfamiliarity, coupled with the shock of the violent death of John F. Kennedy, has brought deep concern to the Russian people with whom we've talked. They're worried about what will happen now. They're frightened that an unknown man now wields that terrible, awful power that resides in the White House. They ask if Johnson is a man who can lead, if he can control what they have been told again and again is the warmonger group in the United States. Informed Soviet sources here say that Premier Khrushchev is on his way back to Moscow from Kiev. He has been in Kiev reportedly for more than a week, but was not expected back so quickly. His foreign minister, Andrei Gromyko, telephoned United States Ambassador Kohler shortly after midnight here tonight, about 3 hours ago, and expressed his personal shock and great sympathy. He said official condolence would come later from the highest sources. That would be Premier Khrushchev and President Brezhnev. Also, shortly after midnight, a large group of Russian students gathered in front of the United States Embassy here. They just stood silently for a while, talking in muffled tones to each other. Then they tried to get into the embassy, they said, to express their condolence to American officials. But Soviet militia guards outside the embassy did not permit them to enter. It is hard to say what really drew them there, curiosity or sympathy, but individually some expressed shock and bewilderment. One of the young men called him another Lincoln. Did he mean Kennedy the man had lived like Lincoln, or that Kennedy the president had died of an assassin's bullet as Lincoln the president had died of an assassin's bullet? A short fur-capped youth of about 18 called Mr. Kennedy a remarkable man. His friend asked a reporter, "Who is Lyndon Johnson?" The man Lee Oswald has not been mentioned here, but sources in the American embassy confirm now that such a man, Lee Harvey Oswald, who has a Russian wife, registered at the embassy's consular section in November of 1959. The embassy says that Oswald apparently did not leave the Soviet Union until 1962. There are reports here from other sources that Oswald, sometime during 1959 and 1962, had asked for Soviet citizenship and had been turned down, it is said. We have not been able to confirm at this hour whether or not such a request for Soviet citizenship had indeed been made here. Oswald did return to the United States with his Russian wife and a daughter born here in 1962, according to official American sources. According to embassy records, Lee Harvey Oswald was born on October 18, 1939. His wife was born in 1941. Some Soviet sources here say that most of the period between his arrival in the Soviet Union in 1959 and his departure in 1961, he spent in or near Odessa. At this hour, that is as much as is known about Lee Oswald. The Communist Party newspaper, Pravda, held up its front page for more than an hour beyond the usual release time today. Pravda came off the presses just about 15 minutes ago. It is now shortly after 3:15 in the morning of Saturday. Pravda published a portrait photo of the late president and a report from their task correspondent in New York. Americans are shaken by the slaying of the president, the story begins. It gives a straightforward report of the actual assassination. It said that commentators in Dallas had linked the crime to ultra-right-wing organizations. From the moment of President Kennedy's arrival, small groups of ultra-rightists gathered in the city under Confederate flags, the Pravda story says, and they carried signs hostile to Kennedy. Under the portrait of the late president, Pravda runs a biography of about 250 words. There were no black obituary bands around the story. This is Stuart Novins in Moscow.
Stuart, one footnote on that report of yours. I wonder what evidence the Russians submit, aside from this report that they quote from Dallas as linking the crime with ultra-right-wing extremists, because there has been no such suggestion here.
That report was coupled with the initial story that was given here by Radio Moscow and later by Moscow Television. And in fact, the Voice of America broadcasts that were monitored here, and I heard many of them myself in English, also had the same connection and the same allusion. One would have to assume that they picked it up from Voice of America.
I see. Mm-hmm. Stu, well, thank you very much. We'll be back to you later on. That was Stuart Novins in Moscow. Alan?
Once again, Dallas, we're going to pass along a message to our listeners in our affiliated stations across the country. That is, that the CBS radio network will supply continuous programming throughout this evening and until 12 midnight Eastern Standard Time. That is 11 o'clock Central, 10 o'clock Mountain, and 9 o'clock Pacific Standard Time. This programming will consist entirely of news broadcasts and appropriate music. We will provide similar network programming tomorrow and Sunday. At the close of tonight's programming, we will notify our affiliated stations in greater detail of our plans for the weekend. And now we're going to pause for 5 seconds for stations to identify themselves. This is the CBS Radio Network.
Studio St. Paul, Minneapolis at 830 WCCO. 28 degrees, 26 and a half minutes past 6. Here is a change in a notice that we gave you earlier. The hockey game, Omaha at St. Paul, has now been canceled. For some time, it had been reported that the game would be played. The St. Paul professional hockey game tonight has now been canceled. The American Olympic hockey game at Rochester, as mentioned earlier, has been canceled. Here now are some specific announcements concerning University of Minnesota activities. The University of Minnesota theater performance, canceled tonight and tomorrow night. The Minnesota-Wisconsin football game scheduled for tomorrow has been called off. Repeating, the Gopher-Badger game at Memorial Stadium tomorrow has been called off. All Dad's Day activities are canceled. The Interfraternity Council at the University of Minnesota has announced that all social events planned for tomorrow night in the fraternity and sorority system at the university have been canceled. The Minnesota M Club Stag for this evening is officially canceled. Tomorrow night's dance at the University of Minnesota Law School, scheduled at the Curtis Hotel, is canceled. This announcement from the University of Minnesota News Service. On the occasion of the designation of a National Day of Mourning, classes and activities will be closed that day. Only such activities requiring emergency staffing will be maintained. Normal classes and office schedules will be maintained except on the officially designated National Day of Mourning. An item about the Minneapolis Symphony Orchestra. Tonight's performance will be given as scheduled in memory of the president, and the Wamso Post-Symphony Party at the Gaslight tonight will be canceled. We'll have announcements on high school activities in a few minutes. WCCO Radio continues its reports of the events. following the assassination of President Kennedy. With more information, we now join Dallas Townsend at CBS Radio headquarters in New York.
New Orleans, we went into city court. The charges against all of us but Oswald were dismissed. He was convicted and paid a fine. Police records in New Orleans show that an L.H. Oswald was convicted of disturbing the peace and was fined $10 last August. Bringier has lived in New Orleans since February 1961. He operates a retail clothing store there. CBS News correspondent Hughes Rudd reports from Dallas, Texas, that the suspect, Lee Oswald, has just been let out of the police interrogation room and has been taken upstairs, presumably for booking. He has continued to deny any participation in the assassination of President Kennedy. It's not known at the moment whether he has been charged with the killing of Dallas policeman J.D. Tippit. The report that we had a few moments ago, which we read to you, would seem to indicate that Oswald must be intimately, closely connected with the killing of Tippit, because the cashier at the Texas Theater in the Oak Cliff section of Dallas says that she had spotted a man who looked like he was running from someone. He kept changing seats in the theater. This was just minutes after the president was assassinated. At that point, Dallas policeman J.D. Tippit and M.N. McDonald rushed to the theater and ran into a rear exit, and according to police headquarters, Tippit fired a shot, while McDonald rushed the suspect, who turned out to be Oswald, and subdued him after a fight. Tippit was shot dead. Oswald admitted owning a .38 caliber pistol, which was used, apparently, according to authorities, in the killing of Tippit. But Oswald has not admitted owning the rifle that was found in the building near the scene of the assassination. That's all we have at the moment on Oswald, but Hughes Rudd, as we said a moment ago, now tells us that Oswald has been taken out of the police interrogation room and has been taken upstairs, presumably for booking. Booking for what? Booking for what crime, we don't yet know. So far, he is still denying any participation in the assassination of President Kennedy.
Perhaps, Dallas, as the time goes along here, we will get more information on Oswald's connection with the assassination. Certainly all of the circumstantial evidence appears to point in his direction. And from what we have learned from some biographical material from the wires and from Stu in Moscow and from this Cuban official in New Orleans, this apparently was quite a fanatical and incredible individual.
But, of course, Alan, none of this jives with the report that we had from Mexico City about 40 minutes ago, to the effect that informed sources in Mexico City said it was believed that the assassin, still not caught, might be heading for Mexico. Perhaps they're talking about some other assassin or would-be assassin.
Yes, I recall that even before that came in, the brief announcement came in that the border between Mexico and the United States had been closed. Maybe this was just a precautionary effort just to cover all possible exits in case.
Alan, here's the latest on Oswald. The United Press International, in a report from Dallas, says Lee Harvey Oswald, a pro-Castro Marxist who once defected to Russia, today was jailed as the prime suspect in the assassination of President Kennedy. Oswald, a 24-year-old former U.S. Marine, was accused of shooting to death a policeman who tried to grab him in a theater just about the moment that President Kennedy was dying in Parkland Memorial Hospital. Another officer, McDonald, subdued Oswald, who lived in a Dallas rooming house with his Russian wife. It was the tip from the theater cashier that led police to him. The cashier, Mrs. Julie Postal, who works at the Texas Theater in the Oak Cliff section of Dallas, says she spotted a man who looked like he was running from someone. He kept changing seats in the theater. She had already heard of the shooting of President Kennedy and Governor Connolly, and she called police. Oswald has admitted owning the .38 caliber pistol, which was used to kill patrolman J.D. Tippit. Tippit was shot twice. Oswald has not admitted owning a rifle found in a building near the scene of the assassination of the president.
Dallas, we have a further note on that question about the Mexican border. Our news bureau in Los Angeles reports that the Mexican border, which had been closed, presumably to keep any fugitive from crossing into Mexico, has now been reopened on a restricted basis. Bona fide Mexicans in the United States are being allowed back into Mexico, and American citizens who were in Mexico are being allowed to cross the border to come back into the United States.
Alan.
Now from the WCCO Radio News Bureau. On Capitol Hill, one of those most shaken by the death of the president was Minnesota Congressman John Blatnik, who came to Congress along with John Kennedy 17 years ago. Here are Blatnik's words, telephoned from his office in Washington.
The assassination of President Kennedy was unbelievably stunning, unbelievably shocking news I have ever received in my life. I still cannot believe it. This is an historical tragedy both for our country and for the world. His tragic loss can only be likened to the tragic and sorrowful death of Abraham Lincoln nearly 100 years ago. In life, President Kennedy gave of himself to his utmost, with great courage, devotion, and total dedication, born of deep conviction from the depths of his heart, to give full freedom to all the people of our country and to build up our domestic strength to support the tremendous requirements necessary to sustain us in world leadership, dedicated to give peace, freedom, and the blessings of a good life to the people of the world. To be so insanely cut down in the prime of his life and at the height of his leadership is a tragedy which events of the near future will soon assess. John F. Kennedy and I came to Congress together 17 years ago as veterans of the recent World War II. I came to know him well personally as a very dear friend. And I came to know his courageous and gracious wife, Jackie, before they were married. I am personally shocked and deeply grieved beyond words. Let us say prayers for him and his family and for the future of our country.
Congressman John Blatnik served in the Central Intelligence Agency as a counter-spy during the war. He told WCCO Radio that he was certain the authorities in Dallas had not revealed all the information they had concerning the killing of the president. If this is the work of a fanatic, Congressman Blatnik said, that's one thing. But if the killing was a part of an organized plot, then this country indeed faces a very serious crisis. He recalled that a Negro minister had been ambushed and killed by a maniac using a rifle with scopes, and there was the case of the freedom-walking mailman who was shot in the back as he walked along an Alabama highway. This begins to look like a pattern for killing, Blatnik said, resembling in some way the plot to kill President Lincoln. WCCO Radio continues its reports of the events following the assassination of President Kennedy. With more information from the CBS radio network, we join Dallas Townsend in New York.
Is that President Johnson will be a vigorously healthy chief executive despite that heart attack of 8 years ago. They base this estimate on the vigorous life that he has led since his recuperation in 1955. The recuperation lasted for several months. Since then, of course, he's been through the political wars, including the 1960 election campaign, and as one specialist recalls, he's even faced a mob. This same specialist, who would prefer that his name not be used, says you could have no better proof of his complete recovery. He and other specialists deferred to Mr. Johnson's own physician, Dr. J. Willis Hurst of Emory University in Atlanta, Georgia, who is en route from New York to Washington. They can speak only of what medical science knows in general about recoveries from heart attacks. Each week, each month, and each year, the victim survives his personal disaster. His heart muscle is healing itself and ridding itself of scar tissue. Certainly there can be no doubt that President Johnson today has been through the kind of shock that comes to few people in life, and as we could tell when he arrived at Andrews Air Force Base a while ago, he has survived it with full equanimity and obvious courage and determination, as he said, to do his best. Dick Hodelet, you are now coming into the studio. What thoughts do you have at the moment?
Well, the thoughts are those of on the consequences, the whys, the wherefore questions, which are not yet easily answered, which are still a matter of speculation, and perhaps we can, as the evidence accumulates, as we get other expert opinion, and as events unfold in Washington, we may be able to make a clearer picture of what is to follow, rather than just of the tragic event of the day. do you have something from Washington now?
Yes, Dick, we may get a glimmer of that in a report we're going to get right now on the meeting that the president is having at the White House. So we'll switch to the White House and CBS News correspondent Paul Niven.
The legislative leaders have now arrived at the White House for their meeting with President Johnson. The group includes the Democratic and Republican leaders in the Senate, Senator Mansfield of Montana and Senator Dirksen of Illinois, the chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, Mr. Fulbright of Arkansas, Senator Hubert Humphrey, the Democratic whip, and Senator Thomas Kuchel of California, the Republican leader, the Republican whip. From the House side have come Congressman Charles Halleck of Indiana, the House Minority Leader, and Speaker John McCormick of Massachusetts, who now is second only to the president himself in the line of succession. There is undoubtedly, we have no word yet as to what is going on in the meeting. It is not difficult to imagine. Undoubtedly, there will be an appeal by the president for national unity in this moment of tragedy and crisis, and a response by members of both houses and members of both parties vowing their cooperation in the difficult days ahead. And while politics will not be discussed in the president's office, it will certainly be on the mind of everyone in that room. The Democrats will be wondering, for example, whether Lyndon Baines Johnson is to be their leader for 1 year during the remainder of Mr. Kennedy's unexpired term, or whether he will seek re-election and thus serve 5 years. On the Republican side, an example of the effect that the assassination of President Kennedy is likely to have in their party was seen in a statement issued tonight by a Republican congressman from Maine, Stanley Tupper. He said, "Every person in this land who has encouraged the vicious extremism that unleashed this murderous assault on President Kennedy and Governor Connally, and every politician who has not raised his voice against the paranoids of the radical right is equally guilty." And thus, while politics are not being discussed as President Johnson meets for the first time as president with his former congressional colleagues, now his legislative leaders, certainly politics is on the mind of everyone in that room. This is Paul Niven at the White House.
Later on, when the President Johnson, has a chance to discuss the situation with members of the cabinet, in addition to his discussions with the legislative leaders of Capitol Hill, his attention will be turned not only to the immediate domestic problems of this 88th Congress and of the United States as it stands today in the grip of enormous problems like civil rights, economic development, but also he will turn his attention to international affairs. President Kennedy had helped to inaugurate what the Russians called the spirit of Moscow, which the president and his advisors were very much more cautious about describing as only a beginning toward a possible exploration of means and ways of coming to further agreements with the Russians, further tactical and further technical and practical agreements. In the days and weeks to come, the key matters such as Vietnam and Berlin, the United Nations matters which affect Africa, which affect outer space, will all be coming across the new president's desk.
Let's continue our CCO coverage now with these high school activity cancellations. The Minneapolis basketball preview in the auditorium has been postponed from tonight until December 4th. Here are some basketball games that have been canceled. Watertown at Eden Prairie, Amory, Wisconsin against Baldwin Woodville, Austin de La Salle, Bloomington at Wilmer, Shakopee St. Anthony, Simley at Randolph, New Richmond, Wisconsin and Durand, Monticello at Elk River, Boyceville at Elmwood, Wisconsin, all of those basketball games canceled. The Osseo faculty game and high school wrestling matches at Stillwater and Sibley against Brooklyn Center. Other cancellations, the high school play at Hinckley, Minnesota tonight, the school play at Columbia Heights both tonight and tomorrow night, the St. Paul Wilson High School play, the Rockford School drama, St. Margaret's Academy play tonight, however tomorrow night's is still scheduled. The Robbinsdale High School vaudeville show has been canceled. WCCO Radio will bring you more special events information on community activities after further reports from the CBS radio network. It's 28 degrees, 17 minutes before 7. Diminishing cloudiness for the Twin Cities area and much colder tonight. Tomorrow, fair and colder. Occasional cloudiness and a little colder tomorrow night. The low tonight, 12 above. The high tomorrow, 20. The low tomorrow night, 5 above. We return to CBS now and hear the words of New York Mayor Robert Wagner.
The world mourns The nation mourns, the city mourns. My grief and that of all New Yorkers I know is personal and irreparable. He was my friend. He was also a friend of man, a friend of peace, a champion and sword of justice. We, each and all, have suffered a loss, many losses, for which we cannot be consoled. Hate has reaped its harvest. Now we must not leave undone any of the great works he was doing, and doing so valorously, so eagerly, so brilliantly. A light has gone out in the world. The nation will carry on under President Johnson. New York City as a whole, and I as mayor, and as an individual, pledge him and our government, and I know our country, total and undivided support in these sad and most difficult and most challenging hours.
United Nations headquarters is in New York City, and the United Nations is a window on the world. There today we saw the shock and the dismay, the regret, the consternation in the faces and in the expressions of diplomats of all skin colors, of all political persuasions, of all religions, coming from all continents of the world. Men who have not always seen eye to eye with President Kennedy in his approach to foreign affairs, but who are at one with the American people today and with the President's associates in mourning the tragic and unnecessary passing of a great man, of a statesman whom many chose to describe in talking to me as the leader of the world, or the leader of the free world. The diplomatic corps in Washington is also expressing its grief and its shock and its regret tonight. And, of course, as this opens further questions of international affairs, and we'll get a report on that now from CBS News diplomatic correspondent Marvin Kalb in Washington.
They used to say at the State Department that John F. Kennedy was his own Secretary of State, listening with due respect to Dean Rusk's advice, but rarely relying upon it. This relationship between White House and State Department is now expected to change. Until President Johnson acquires the self-confidence needed for his overall responsibility and the knowledge of his new worldwide powers, he will have to depend to an enormous extent upon Dean Rusk, his Secretary of State, to run this nation's foreign policy. That means that there will be no change in American foreign policy, no change in its commitments abroad, no change even in nuance. Only the personality of the office of the President has changed. Someone might say at this point that this is the glory of America, that in a moment of national tragedy there is an orderly transition of power, not internal political chaos. Secretary Rusk is on his way back to Washington right now, expected to arrive shortly after midnight. He heard about Mr. Kennedy's assassination while en route to Tokyo for an important economic conference with the Japanese. Other members of the Kennedy cabinet are with him. He ordered the plane turned around immediately. American ambassadors all over the world have been notified formally by the State Department about President Kennedy's death. Messages of condolences from world leaders have been pouring into the department all afternoon. The big and immediate question raised here this afternoon was, would the Russians take advantage of this moment of confusion and bewilderment in the Western world to press their cause? There are no easy answers to this question tonight, but the drift of informed opinion is that they will not. Confusion exists in Moscow, too, when there is confusion in Washington. And both capitals in the last 3 years have developed a healthy respect for one another's nuclear power. Neither side wishes to push the other in a moment of national crisis. The late President Kennedy did not last fall after the Cuban crisis when he could have, and now Premier Khrushchev is not expected to push the United States at this moment of our national crisis. Instead, both sides will sit tight and move easily, not rock the boat. Certainly not until Khrushchev has had a prolonged chance to examine the United States and the Western world under President Johnson's tutelage and guidance. This is Marvin Kalb in Washington.
The foreign policy of the United States is not just a matter of the whim of the chief executive. It is the expression of a national will and a national purpose, and it is based on a national effort, which was apparent in the speech that President Kennedy made in Fort Worth this very morning. It was to be his last speech of a political tour of Texas, of an important southern state, in which he was looking ahead to the election of next year. But in this speech, and even on this political occasion, it was plain to his listeners, and it was plain to the people who analyzed the words of the Chief Executive of the United States, that his mind was very much on the problem that Marvin Kalb has just defined, the problem of maintaining a position of strength from which the United States could defend and maintain its own policy, its own interests in the world, and also defend its allies and associates.
Now let's continue our WCCO coverage with a list of church services for this evening. Now this is a list that we have not brought you before. We've brought you many, and here are more. A prayer service at the Minnetonka Lutheran Church tonight at 8 o'clock. A prayer service at 9 tonight at the Woodlake Lutheran Church in Richfield. The chapel at Arlington Hills Lutheran Church will be open throughout the evening for prayer and meditation. A memorial service at 7:30 this evening at the Oak Grove Lutheran Church in Richfield. The Bethany Church in Richfield open this evening for prayer and meditation. The Gethsemane Baptist Church at Hanson and Northdale in Coon Rapids, a special memorial service at 8. The St. Stephen's Lutheran Church in West St. Paul open for prayer and meditation. The Emmanuel Lutheran Church of Eden Prairie open for prayer at 8, services at 9. Gustavus Adolphus Lutheran Church, Northeast Minneapolis, a prayer service tonight at 8. Gustavus Adolphus Lutheran Church at 27th and Lincoln Northeast, open at 8 for a prayer service, a service of prayer at the Shepherd of the Hills Lutheran Church in Hopkins. Now let's rejoin CBS, which is bringing you portions of a speech given at Dallas this morning by the late President of the United States, John Kennedy.
Contributed to its growth. He speaks for Fort Worth. He speaks for the country. And I don't know any city that's better represented in the Congress of the United States than Fort Worth. And if there are any Democrats here this morning, I'm sure you won't hold that against them. 3 years ago, last September, I came here on the Vice President and spoke at Burke Burnett Park. And I called in that speech for a national security policy and a national security system which was second to none. A position which said not first but, if, when, and how, but first. That city responded to that call as it has through its history. And we have been putting that pledge into practice ever since. And I want to say a word about that pledge here in Fort Worth, which understands national defense and its importance to the security of the United States. During the days of the Indian War, this city was a fort. During the days of World War I, even before the United States got into the war, Royal Canadian Air Force pilots were training here. During the days of World War II, the great Liberator bombers, on which my brother flew with his co-pilot from this city, were produced here. First non-stop flight around the world took off and returned here in a plane built in factories here. The first truly intercontinental bomber, the B-36, was produced here. The B-58, which is the finest weapon system in the world today, which it demonstrated most recently in flying from Tokyo to London with an average speed of nearly 1,000 miles per hour, is a Fort Worth project. The Iroquois helicopter from Fort Worth is a mainstay in our fight against the guerrillas in South Vietnam. The transportation of crews between our missile sites is done in planes produced here in Fort Worth. So wherever the confrontation may occur, and in the last 3 years it's occurred at least 3 occasions, in Laos, in Berlin, and in Cuba, and it will again, wherever it occurs, the products of Fort Worth and the men of Fort Worth provide us with a sense of security. And in the not too distant future,
this is a recording of President Kennedy's last speech this morning.
A new Fort Worth product. And I'm glad that there was a table separating Mr. Hicks and myself. A new Fort Worth product. The TFX, Tactical Fighter Experimental. Nobody knows what those words mean, but that's what they mean. Tactical Fighter Experimental will serve the forces of freedom and will be the #1 airplane in the world today. There's been a good deal of discussion of the long and hard-fought competition to win the TFX contract, but very little discussion about what this plane will do. It will be the first operational aircraft ever produced that can literally spread its wings through the air. It will thus give us a single plane capable of carrying out missions of speed as well as distance, able to fly very far in one form or very fast in another. It can take off from rugged, short airstrips, enormously increasing the Air Force's ability to participate in limited wars. The same basic plane will serve the Navy's carriers, saving the taxpayers at least $1 billion in cost if they built separate planes for the Navy and the Air Force. The government of Australia, by purchasing $125 million of TFX planes before they're even off the drawing boards, has already testified to the merit of this plane, and at the same time, it's confident in the ability of Fort Worth to meet its schedule. In all these ways, the success of our national defense depends upon this city in the western United States, 10,000 miles from Vietnam, 5,000 or 6,000 miles from Berlin, thousands of miles from trouble spots in Latin America, in Africa, or the Middle East. And yet Fort Worth and what it does and what it produces participates in all these great historic events. Texas as a whole and Fort Worth bear particular responsibility for this national defense effort. For military procurement in this state totals nearly $1.25 billion, fifth highest among all the states of the Union. There are more military personnel on active duty in this state than any in the nation save one. And it's not Massachusetts. Any in the nation save one with a combined military-civilian defense payroll of well over $1 billion. I don't recite these for any partisan purpose. They're the result of American determination to be second to none. And as a result of the effort which this country has made in the last 3 years, we are second to none. In the past 3 years, we have increased the defense budget of the United States by over 20%, increased the program of acquisition for Polaris submarines from 24 to 41, increased our Minuteman missile purchase program by more than 75%, doubled the number of strategic bombers and missiles on alert, doubled the number of nuclear weapons available in the strategic alert forces, increased the tactical nuclear forces deployed in Western Europe by over 60%, added 5 combat-ready divisions to the armies of the United States and 5 tactical fighter wings to the Air Force of the United States, increased our strategic airlift capability by 75%, and increased our special counterinsurgency forces, which are engaged now in South Vietnam, by 600%. I hope those who want a strong America and place it on some signs will also place those figures next to it.
This is a recording of President Kennedy's last speech in Fort Worth this morning.
This is not an easy effort. This requires sacrifice by the people of the United States. But this is a very dangerous and uncertain world. As I said earlier, on 3 occasions in the last 3 years, the United States has had a direct confrontation. No one can say when it will come again. No one expects that our life will be easy. Certainly not in this decade, and perhaps not in this century. But we should realize what a burden and responsibility the people of the United States have borne for so many years. Here, a country which lived in isolation divided and protected by the Atlantic and the Pacific, uninterested in the struggles of the world around it. Here, in the short space of 18 years after the Second World War, we put ourselves, by our own will and by necessity, into defensive alliances with countries all around the globe. Without the United States, South Vietnam would collapse overnight. Without the United States, the CETO alliance would collapse overnight. Without the United States, the CENTO alliance would collapse overnight. Without the United States, there would be no NATO, and gradually Europe would drift into neutralism and indifference. Without the effort of the United States and the Alliance for Progress, the communist advance onto the mainland of South America would long ago have taken place. So this country, which desires only to be free, which desires to be secure, which desires to live at peace for 18 years under 3 different administrations, has borne more than its share of the burden, has stood watch for more than its number of years. I don't think that we are fatigued or tired. We would like to live as we once lived, but history will not permit it. The communist balance of power is still strong. The balance of power is still on the side of freedom. We are still the keystone and the arch of freedom, and I think we will continue to do as we have done in our past, our duty, and the people of Texas will be in the lead. So I'm glad to come. I'm glad to come to this state, which has played such a significant role in so many efforts in this century, and to say that here in Fort Worth, you people will be playing a major role in the maintenance of the security of the United States for the next 10 years. I'm confident, as I look to the future, that our chances for security, our chances for peace, are better than they've been in the past. And the reason is because we're stronger. And with that strength is a determination to not only maintain the peace, but also the vital interests of the United States. To that great cause, Texas and the United States are committed. Thank you.
This has been a recording of President Kennedy's last speech made this morning in Fort Worth, Texas, to a breakfast meeting of the Fort Worth Chamber of Commerce. Only 3 hours after he made this speech, this man, in the full prime of his strength and vigor and clarity of mind, was cut down by the senseless bullet of an assassin. Here now is a message for our listeners and our affiliated stations across the country. The CBS radio network will supply continuous programming throughout this evening and until 12 midnight Eastern Standard Time. That is, 11 o'clock Central, 10 o'clock Mountain, and 9 o'clock Pacific Standard Time. This programming will consist entirely of news broadcasts and appropriate music. We will provide similar network programming tomorrow and Sunday. At the close of tonight's programming, we will notify our affiliated stations in greater detail of our plans for the weekend. We will now have a 5-second pause for stations to identify themselves. This is the CBS Radio Network.
Studios Minneapolis, St. Paul at 830 WCCO. We continue our coverage now and bring you a list of social events tonight that have been canceled. The Oltman Junior High School Dance at St. Paul Park, the Hootenanny at St. Michael's High School and at Pillsbury Citizen Service, the high school dance at New Ulm, social games at the Irish Club on Rice Street in St. Paul, a dance by the Knights of Columbus at Rogers, Minnesota tomorrow night, a dance tonight at White Eagle Hall in northeast Minneapolis, in Centerville a card party at St. Genevieve Church, a fun frolic at Visitation Parish at Minnesota Valley Country Club, an NFO dance at Waconia, the Excelsior Junior High dance, the high school dance tonight at St. Paul Monroe. These are all cancellations. The Catholic Mixer at the Prom in St. Paul, the Canby High School dance, the fun night of Job's Daughters in South St. Paul, the Fun Fest at Pillsbury School in northeast Minneapolis, the dance at Prior Lake High School, the Youth Center program at Elam Baptist Church in Minneapolis, the Athletic Jamboree at Renville, Minnesota, the card party at Unity House in Minneapolis, at Coon Rapids, the Bonanza Club and the Lions Club dance. Those are all cancellations for tonight. A reminder again that the Minnesota football game tomorrow with Wisconsin has been called off. No game tomorrow, and all Dad's Day activities at the university also have been called off. 3 minutes past 7, 28 degrees is our CCO temperature. Rain and snow in CCO land weather forecasts. In North Dakota, occasional cloudiness through tomorrow night, with scattered light snow tomorrow and tomorrow night. Lows tonight from 8 below to 10 above. Highs tomorrow 20 to 35. South Dakota, occasional cloudiness through tomorrow night, with scattered snow flurries in the northwest tomorrow. Lows tonight from 0 to 15 above. Highs tomorrow from 20 to 40. For Iowa, the rain will end tonight, with mostly fair skies tomorrow and tomorrow night. Lows tonight 15 to 35. Highs tomorrow in the 30s. Wisconsin, rain changing to snow in the north half, rain mixed with snow in the south tonight. There's the chance of a heavy accumulation of snow in excess of 4 inches near Lake Superior tonight. Tomorrow, snow flurries in the northeast and extreme north, cloudy skies elsewhere. Partly cloudy tomorrow night. Lows tonight 10 to 28, highs tomorrow 15 to 34. Minnesota, diminishing cloudiness and much colder tonight with occasional snow in the northeast. Tomorrow, fair and colder. Occasional cloudiness and continued cold tomorrow night with scattered light snow in the north. Lows tonight from 0 to 15, highs tomorrow 10 to 25. For the Twin Cities area, diminishing cloudiness and much colder tonight. Tomorrow, fair and colder. Occasional cloudiness and a little colder tomorrow night. The low tonight 12 above. The high tomorrow 20. The low tomorrow night 5 above. The road information section of the Minnesota Highway Department says driving conditions in northwestern Minnesota are much better after blading and sanding. However, there are still icy spots, and motorists who plan to drive in the Crookston, Wadena, Bemidji, Thief River Falls area should be on constant alert. Now let's continue our coverage following the assassination of President Kennedy with more information from CBS Radio headquarters in New York and Dallas Townsend discussing Lee Oswald.
Citizenship, but got a U.S. government-paid passage home when he had a change of heart. Oswald was born in New Orleans October 18th, 1939. 20 years later, on October 30th, 1959, he appeared at the U.S. Embassy in Moscow and told officials there that he wanted to renounce his American citizenship. At that time, he was reported to have told officials, "I am a Marxist." The FBI has confirmed that Oswald did go to Russia and did ask for Soviet citizenship. He had recently been discharged from the Marine Corps. Oswald told the embassy officials that he planned to tell Soviet officials everything he learned while he was a radar operator during his 3-year enlistment in the Marines. Embassy officials said Russia never granted Oswald's request for citizenship. In any case, after having been in Russia for 3 years, according to one report in the Minsk area, and after marrying a Russian woman who still speaks no English, and after fathering a baby, after all this, Oswald in February 1962 apparently had a change of heart. He wrote the embassy in Moscow and asked for a passport to the United States. By that time, he had married the Russian woman whose name is given as Marina Nikolaevna, a hospital employee in the city of Minsk. They have either one child or 2 children, it's not definite which. Embassy officials reviewed his case, and since he had not been given Soviet citizenship, it was decided to give him a passport to the United States. Government records in Washington show that he left Moscow at the end of May 1962. The embassy in Moscow advanced him $435 to defray the cost of his trip. This is a customary practice in the cases of Americans stranded in a foreign country. It's not clear from the records if he ever repaid the loan. According to Carlos Bringuier of the Cuban Student Directory in New Orleans, Oswald was in New Orleans 2 months ago as the chairman of a pro-Castro Fair Play for Cuba committee. He was reported to have been arrested for allegedly distributing pro-communist propaganda on a street corner. The House Committee on Un-American Activities says Oswald appears to be the same man who headed a Fair Play for Cuba committee in New Orleans. Police records there show that he did pay a $10 fine. This year, Oswald applied for another passport. He told the State Department he wanted to visit various countries in Western Europe and also Poland and the Soviet Union. He said he planned to make the trip between October 1963 and December or January of next year. The passport was issued at New Orleans on June 25th of this year. It's not clear whether Oswald ever repaid the money loaned for his passage back to the United States on his first trip, and obviously he did not use the newly issued passport. That's the That's the story on Oswald as it begins to build up, as more details come in from Dallas, from New Orleans, and from Washington, as this man, this with a peculiar background, is still being questioned in Dallas, Texas, in connection with the fatal shooting of policeman J.D. Tippit, and perhaps also with the assassination of President Kennedy.
So we don't know whether it was the act of a madman or the act of a left-wing political fanatic, or if it was, as Radio Moscow keeps insisting, the action of a right-wing fanatic. Radio Moscow has, of course, harped on the opposition to President Kennedy's foreign policy that has come to the surface in Dallas, perhaps as much, if not more, than in many cities in the United States. It was only a couple of weeks ago, a month ago, on October 24th, that Adlai Stevenson, visiting Dallas on United Nations Day to make a speech on the United States and UN policy in that city, was spat upon and hit on the head by a woman carrying a sign objecting to America's UN policy and to him personally.
Dick, I was interested to note in the last report we had from Stuart Nowens in Moscow, the speed with which the Russians, in their accounts of President Kennedy's death, did pin it on right-wing extremists.
Well, I must say that the spontaneous reaction even of non-communists, of non-Russians at the United Nations this afternoon, when the word first circulated in the corridors, was that, based, of course, on Mr. Stevenson's experience in Dallas and on what one has heard from Dallas and the whole stamping grounds of right-wing elements like General Edwin Walker and others, the conclusion that was leaped to at the UN was that right-wing extremists might very well be responsible.
But I think we should point out, and we should emphasize, Dick, that at the moment there is absolutely no evidence at all to justify that assumption.
And
churches throughout the Twin Cities are packed tonight with persons marking the passing of President Kennedy. At the Basilica of St. Mary's in Minneapolis, a Requiem Mass was held this evening. There are many other church services planned for or going on right now this evening. Here are some of them, some that we have not given you earlier on WCCO. A prayer service at the Emerson Avenue Congregational Church in Minneapolis until 9. At St. Mary's Episcopal Church in St. Paul, meditation from 7:30 to 9. A special service at the Wesley Methodist Church in St. Paul at 7:30. A memorial service at Mayflower Congregational Church in Minneapolis at 8. A special service at the Presbyterian Church of the Master in Coon Rapids at 8:30. A prayer service of the Lutheran Church of St. Philip the Beacon at Oakwood School at 8 tonight. A service at Gloria Dei Lutheran Church in St. Paul at 9 p.m. We now have from CBS details on the condition of Governor Connolly of Texas, and so we rejoin CBS.
After 4 hours of chest surgery, a team of 3 surgeons, including one rushed from Houston 250 miles away, removed one of the governor's ribs and repaired a lung that had been cut by a rifle bullet. The governor, it appears, turned slightly in the car as the shots were fired, and the chief of surgeons at the hospital said that it saved his life. If he had not turned, the bullet would have gone through the middle of his back and probably would have punctured the heart. As it was, a fragment struck Governor Connolly's right wrist, fracturing it. Other fragments struck his left leg just above the knee and lodged there. The governor was conscious. He gasped to an aide, "Take care of Nellie," that is his wife, who was sitting next to him in the car, in the jump seat, just before the Kennedy couple. The bullet entered Connolly's right shoulder, emerged from his chest, fragments lodged in his ribs. The 5th rib was then removed during surgery. As it stands now, apparently, the governor is, while still in serious, nevertheless in satisfactory condition, and one of his aides says that all damage has been arrested. Incidentally, the governor apparently does not yet know that President Kennedy is dead.
Dick, the Kennedy family, or a good many members of it, is gathering at Hyannisport, Massachusetts, on Cape Cod, and we're going to get a report from there now from CBS News correspondent Tom Costigan.
Hyannisport is just as saddened and stunned by the assassination of the president, and even more so, because here the feeling was one of personal warmth and close friendship. The Kennedy family, and particularly the president, were known as friends and neighbors. Diagonally across the street is the home of Larry Newman, a longtime and close friend of the late president. Mr. and Mrs. Newman were stunned by the news, as everyone else was. They had looked forward to the coming holiday in the heightened spirit of Thanksgiving and the gathering of the Kennedy clan. In the Kennedy home across the street, the lights are on, gleaming eerily through the rolling mist. Senator Ted Kennedy and his sister Eunice Shriver joined their mother and father late this afternoon. Two sources close to the family said Ambassador Joseph Kennedy, under strict nursing care for the past 10 days, has not been told of his son's sudden death. This morning, Larry Newman, who has played host to scores of White House correspondents since 1960, had been preparing to hang an autographed picture of the president in his living room in preparation for Thanksgiving and the gathering of the Kennedy clan and the press and the scores of other White House aides. The picture was autographed to the Newmans' 3 children, and 5-year-old Leila told me she had a pet nickname for the president. She called him, she said, Mr. Kissable. This is Tom Costigan in Hyannisport.
Mrs. Jacqueline Kennedy, who flew back to Washington from Dallas with the body of her husband, then accompanied it in the Navy ambulance to Bethesda Naval Hospital, and she is there now. We'll get a report on the scene there at Bethesda Naval Hospital from Tony Sargent in Washington.
The body of President Kennedy is here at Bethesda Naval Hospital, just north of Washington. Hospital sources indicate a post-mortem examination is underway. Mrs. Jacqueline Kennedy and Attorney General Robert Kennedy accompanied the ambulance in the 45-minute drive from Andrews Air Force Base to Bethesda. On arrival, they entered the hospital's main entrance, while at least 1,000 spectators watched from the front lawn. Dozens more, patients and hospital staff members, peered from half-lighted windows in the 19-story building. The ambulance then left the main entrance, carrying the president's body around to a rear door near the morgue area in which the postmortem would be conducted. Minutes later, Defense Chief Robert McNamara arrived here after meeting with President Johnson. An Army officer with the presidential party indicated the body will go from Bethesda Naval Hospital later tonight to a funeral home. There, it presumably would be prepared to lie in repose tomorrow at the White House and through Sunday and Monday morning in the Capitol Rotunda. This is Tony Sargent at Bethesda Naval Hospital.
The grief at President Kennedy's death is worldwide. In London, Britain's political leaders tonight paid tribute to him in a special nationwide television program. The Prime Minister, Sir Alec Douglas Hume, said, "There are times in life when minds and hearts stand still, and one such is now. All of you will have felt, as I did, that everything in one cried out in protest at the news that President Kennedy was dead at the hand of the assassin. This young, gay, and brave statesman killed in the full vigor of his manhood when he bore on his shoulders all the cares and hopes of the world." The British Prime Minister recalled that only a few weeks ago he walked with President Kennedy in the grounds of the White House. The president then told him of his plan to guard and keep the peace of the world. "As I recall his vivid presence," said Sir Alec, "he lives in my mind as a man who first of all was a man of peace, and a man with a deep religious faith dedicated to healing the divisions between men, and then as a man of physical courage. He was a man who was determined that the curse of war should never scourge mankind again, if he could do anything to arrest the danger. He was one who had in his power and in his hand such power as had never been given before in the history of man to mortal man." There was a touching gesture in West Berlin tonight, the West Berlin which President Kennedy visited earlier this year and to which he gave such a share of his own optimism and such a share of his own courage. Some 25,000 West Berliners took part in a midnight torchlight demonstration in memory of the president. They marched to the city hall where the president himself had addressed this great gathering and said, "I am a Berliner." There, Mayor Willy Brandt was to speak to him. The march, appropriately enough, was called by students' organizations. President Kennedy was especially popular with young people everywhere in the world, Germany too, but people of all age groups turned out, many of them wearing black armbands of mourning.
Dick, there have been similar gestures in this country, gestures almost without number. Scores of weekend sports events, theatrical performances, and social events have been canceled or postponed. Major stock exchanges have closed, and numerous businesses followed suit. And now here's the latest from Dallas. Lee H. Oswald, held as a prime suspect in the assassination of President Kennedy, today was formally charged with the murder of a Dallas policeman who was slain shortly after the president was. That policeman was J.D. Tippit. He and another policeman rushed into the rear entrance of a movie theater on a telephone tip from the cashier, who had heard the news that the president had been shot and reported to police by telephone that she had seen a man rush into the theater who looked as if he were trying to escape. And she said he kept changing his seat. The policeman rushed in. Apparently, shots were exchanged, and Tippit was mortally wounded. The other policeman, McDonald, M.N. McDonald, seized Oswald and subdued him after what seems to have been a violent scuffle. Oswald still has not admitted the killing of Patrolman Tippit, and he has denied having anything to do with the assassination of the president. But almost certainly there must be a strong connection.